As in our last video, we left off with the Berlin blockade. The Berlin blockade was a response to the Soviet Union blockading Berlin after the zones of Berlin were combined into an Allied zone and a Soviet Union zone. Okay, Germany and NATO. With this is the rise of the defensive alliance that will dominate the 20th century. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was designed to counter Soviet power in Europe. And in 1955, the Soviet Union and the other communist nations of Eastern Europe formed their own alliance, the Warsaw Pact, which was designed to stop NATO aggression. These two alliances will dominate the 20th century. The first major conflict of the Cold War is the Korean conflict. And it basically happens when Korea is split at the 38th parallel between North and South Korea. North Korea is communist, South Korea is capitalist, and the North Koreans will invade South Korea. With the idea of containment, President Eisenhower will have a famous quote, "We'll have a dozen Koreas soon if we don't take a firm stand." This is the idea of the domino theory. When one nation would fall, then all the surrounding nations would fall as well. American General Douglas MacArthur will lead the UN forces in Korea. The invasion by MacArthur of North Korea goes very well at the beginning. As the Allies push north, though, the Chinese will get involved in the Korean conflict, and the Chinese will push the Allied forces back to the 38th parallel, which is where the war began. By 1953, there's little change in territory on each side, and each side signs an armistice. This armistice basically is not a peace treaty, but a temporary ceasefire, and that armistice still holds even today. And here are some maps that show you the Korean conflict. Cause and effects of the Cold War. The causes: disagreements between the Allies during World War II, differing U.S. and Soviet political and economic systems, capitalism versus communism, differing goals for post-war Germany and Eastern Europe, Soviet expansion of communism into Eastern Europe, and resistance to Soviet aggression by the United States. The effects of this is the political and military struggles around the world. We just looked at the Korean conflict as an example. Increased military spending and leading to an arms race, and the ever-present danger of nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation. As we know, the United States dropped 2 bombs in World War II at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These bombs were developed by what was called the Manhattan Project. Eventually, the United States monopoly on nuclear weapons ends. In 1949, the Soviets explode their first atomic bomb. And from this point forward, we'll see bigger and badder nuclear weapons be built. In 1952, the United States tested the first fusion-powered hydrogen bomb, and it vaporized the island that it was on. The Soviet Union will respond less than a year with their own hydrogen bombs. With nuclear weapons, the nature of warfare changed. No longer would it be troops and tanks and conventional weapons, but rather an increase in nuclear weapons production. This was called deterrence. Deterrence means basically if you have enough weapons, the other person will not attack you because the other country could annihilate you. Deterrence leads into a policy called MAD, which was mutually assured destruction. This was the foreign policy of the United States and the Soviet Union during this portion of the Cold War. As we talked about also, this Cold War is not just a war or a conflict, it's also a technological race. With this, we get the space race. The Russians will take the lead in the space race with the launching of Sputnik, which is history's first artificial satellite. But think, if you can put a nuclear weapon on a missile, if you can put a person into space or a satellite, you can also put a nuclear weapon on top of the rocket. This will cause great fear in the United States, and it will have huge impacts in education, in the media, in books, movies, and comic books that plotted the end of the world because of nuclear destruction. Here's an image of Sputnik, the first human artificial satellite.